Did Kevin Harris indicate whether or not he'd be on?
I've not heard from Kevin. I don't know.
I just remember he wasn't here last month.
Yeah, he had a broken pipe last month. That's why he wasn't here.
So if we're ready, I'll begin. I'll say a prayer to open us up. Will you pray with me? Lord God, we thank you for bringing us together tonight. I ask you to fill us with your spirit of wisdom so that we may work for the betterment of your church and your mission in this world. Help us to unite as your brothers and sisters in Christ so we may do your work together for the unity of your church. Amen. Okay. So we had, last time we met, a check-in, learning about each other, had a good question. So we thought we'd start tonight's meeting by asking another question that everyone is invited to answer. So the question we came up with this month, we'd like to talk about is, what do you mean by vitality, say, of the local congregation, the region? Since we've been talking a lot about our purpose, deals with the vitality of the local congregations in the region.
Okay, so Justin, we were talking about kidney stones to begin the conversation. When I think of kidney stones or any other kind of illness, I think of not being whole or healthy. So vitality would mean an absence of kidney stones, meaning vitality would mean the health and wholeness of the body, in that sense, the body of Christ. And so, you know, we can define that in many, many ways, but I would just say that wholeness and where every part is working together for the good of the whole body.
Sweeping.
To put it shorter, Daryl, just no kidney stones.
Yeah.
I think we
Well,
just
yeah.
lost Steve Martin, just to note it.
I think of vitality, I guess I think of that feeling, that alive feeling, but the activity directed toward others, vital in the mission of the church. You know, to define growth and vitality in terms of meeting the needs of our neighbors and loving our neighbors and accepting help from others as we need help, and that sense of, you know, we're kind of doing what Jesus called us to do.
And I say amen to both what Kelly and Daryl shared. I'd like to include, though, I really like the words, you know, meeting the mission of the congregation, but also, is the congregation contributing to the community? How is the congregation viewed in the community as through their outreach? Also, I think of healthy financial situation. The more healthy we are financially, the more we can do. Those are the things that kind of come to my mind, in addition to what Kelly and Daryl shared.
Have a stable financial situation. Because I suppose if you're worried about just paying the bills constantly, always behind, that's what's going to control you. The short term, how do we meet this financial need? You're not going to focus on much else probably if that's the main issue.
I think another sign of vitality is the level of trust within the organization.
Like, what does that look like?
Part of what it looks like is the ability to speak honestly with each other without fear of being shut down or condemned because you might share an unpopular perspective.
Open lines of communication. I usually think in churches where you're like, well, I'm not going to say that because that will probably get me fired.
Well, good evening, everyone. Apologize for being a little late. Can you bring me up to speed as to where we are on our agenda, please?
We're just at the beginning of answering what do we mean by vitality, since a lot of our what we've been talking about in our mission deals with strengthening the vitality of our local congregations in the region. So we're discussing, well, what do we mean? What do we understand that to be?
So are we directing it like from a local church perspective or a regional perspective, or?
You can do both. One or the other, both. We have talked about how they're very interrelated intrinsically. So we've somewhat talked more about the local congregation. But I believe there obviously is a relationship between both, and we would probably think what does it look like to have a healthy relationship between the congregations and regions that we'd be striving for as well. So that would be completely open to address.
Kevin, I don't know if it helps, but the framing of your purpose, your group's purpose, was discover ways to strengthen the connection and vitality of the church in its local, regional, and general expressions.
And so our regions can only be as vital as our local congregations. So I guess maybe a starting point would be with the local churches. In my mind,
don't you think that we could have a vital regional church without every congregation may not be vital in that region? Unfortunately.
yeah, from just kind of what I've experienced with at the national level and regional level, I think some of our regions, I think some of their vitality is a result of maybe past connectivity. But I think going forward, I think it's probably going to take the need of both being, connected. I think, when you talk about endowments and things like that, I think those past relationships have been much stronger than maybe they are now. And I think going forward, I think that tie, that connection needs to be stronger. So we can keep going forward, but I think the regions can keep moving forward, but I think they'll drop a lot along the way.
I have a few different thoughts. They may be connected or maybe they're the same in different words. One is, I think of vitality as energy that flows from a spirit of genuine acceptance, care, appreciation, and accountability. I also think vitality is a sense that you already belong, that there is no one on the outside or who is excluded. And then third, vitality is a sense of being connected. And I think that fits for the regional church, right? We don't have insider or outsider churches, the ones we like or don't like, or pastors, or members.
I know for me, when you sent these questions out, I really appreciated, by the way, receiving those. So we had a little time to think about those. For me, part of what I mean by vitality of the local congregation, especially, is making and equipping new disciples among the unchurched and earning a reputation in the community for collaborating in the work of justice. If we're not making and equipping new disciples, I'm not sure that we'll have the vitality that we think is possible.
I would say that vitality also has to do with your ability to respond to change and to grow from that change. Because if you can't do that, you're going to die out. So I feel that part of it has to do with, being able to respond and meet the needs as things are going on, as things are changing for the congregation, for the region, for whatever, the community. So my 2 cents on that.
Relevance.
Well, and I think, Megan, some of that I think we're going to have a big test of vitality in the coming months as we begin to emerge from the pandemic, hopefully, and we start understanding more the impact on the church and how the church responds to where we find ourselves. I'm not sure we know where we're going to be yet. I think we know we're going to be someplace a little different than we maybe thought we were going to be or were when we started into this. But we have a great opportunity to respond. I think it's an opportunity more than, a problem. Maybe it's both, depending on how we look at it.
Oh, I thought we had a good list of things, or just conversation on different things. I think in general, usually what I would hear people start measuring the health or vitality of a congregation more empirically, usually by how much money are we bringing in, how many people are in the seats. And so, but I don't think that's always the best measurements of vitality, right? Like, what about the spiritual health we're talking about? What are we producing? I think that came out of a couple comments about stability, like what gives us stability to be able to last through change. Or I think we heard a couple of people say you'll know them by their fruits. So that's just interesting to hear, since we keep using that word. It's like the Princess Bride, but what are you, you keep saying that word. What do you mean by that word? So I found it helpful just to listen to people
So I'm
talk
curious
through.
about what you do with what you just heard then.
Possibility for me because I'm just certified. Okay.
What happened there?
Joyce, was that you who asked that question? So
I am out of here. I'm just out of here. That was stupidly, ridiculously long. And I don't know how else you can do it. But I'm just.
So Joyce, was that you who asked that question, or?
I did.
Could
I
you,
thought
yeah.
Yeah, I thought the question was purposeful in that there was still some question about if that's part of our purpose statement, if we're talking about vitality, to get a better sense from this group as a whole. What do we really mean? Now that you've heard a lot of responses and where people are at, what do you do with this information now? How does it help you?
Thank you.
Or maybe knowing that there are several ways we look at vitality, and that's okay, that we're kind of holding all of these together, that's what you needed.
I'm not sure what we do with these. Maybe the first thing that I would want to do is to sit with them, but I'm wondering if there's a way that we can sit with them with intention rather than just letting them collect dust until next month. That's what I would probably do, quite honestly, is I dust them off before the next meeting next month and glance at them and go, oh yeah, we did talk about that. So I wonder if there's some way that we can maybe even have some exchange around the question you just asked, Joyce. Maybe there's an email listserv group that we can create with each other to say, at least once a week, add a reflection to Joyce's question. What will you do? What will you do with the information we just exchanged about local church vitality? You being us, the partnership, not necessarily you and your local church or me and the regional church. But what will you do, and how will that help you think about what it means to be in this partnership? I don't know. That's my first cut at that.
Do you just put them all together in one big list and definition and say, this is what we mean, this is what we're searching for? Do you think it through, try and make it more compact, or?
Well, I think it's been helpful to hear everyone's comments, but I guess, Joyce, are you wondering, like, where do we go next? Now that we've heard what each other thinks about vitality, and since we use that's such an important word in our mission or our goal, whatever, are you asking, like, where do we go from just discussing that word? How do we put it into action? Is that kind of where?
It doesn't have to lead to action in my mind necessarily, but you were intentional enough to use that word in your mission or in your purpose statement.
Mm-hmm.
And now you're getting more data about what people might think about that word, how they might be using it, how they're conceptualizing it in terms of your purpose. So I was just wondering how it's been helpful and what you might do with this information now that you have it.
It strikes me that one of the issues that we have is it's all well and good for us to understand vitality amongst ourselves. But at some point, in order to approach our purpose, we either need to be able to gauge vitality of local congregations, or find a way to have local congregations be active in gauging their own vitality on a basis similar to what we discussed, in order to understand if we are in fact, through our efforts and a partnership, doing anything about vitality. And not just from our perspective, but from the local perspective as well. So there's a gap we have to bridge here. And I'm not sure what that looks like yet. I just know that for me, there seems to be a gap there.
Well, maybe that's good to, get into what, Roman numeral 3. We have like what's left to do, not just what do we work on together, but how do we work on it together. It might help us go into what do we need and want from each other to be able to say we are in partnership. Because if we're talking about this vitality aspect, that should help us narrow down what we're in partnership for.
I wonder if I could jump in for a moment. I'm thinking of an example that we have in the church between clergy and congregations. We have a congregational code of ethics and we have a clergy code of ethics, and it maps out for us. There are certain things that we want to hold ourselves accountable to each other about. So the quest for clarity about what we mean by vitality is also a question about to what will we hold ourselves accountable to each other? If this vitality is really important, can we be clear enough and agree? Can there be consensus around that? And I wonder then if that doesn't suggest that one of the tasks of our group is, in the course of time of working with our congregations, because we had talked about engaging congregations in conversation, that part of what the project would be to engage in a conversation about what does vitality mean, and collecting some of that information and making that available so that congregations have an opportunity to have some ownership in what vitality is going to look like. It parallels another conversation that we're going to be having shortly.
That's right. That's right.
Are you suggesting, Bill, a kind of code of vitality, if you will?
I just wanted to use that as an example of something the church has already done, and it has helped us, so that if I breach that covenant, if I breach that that agreement that I've made with you, then I will hold myself to certain behaviors and standards for the sake of the whole church. And it took a while, I'm sure, to develop all of those. But once we did, it seemed to make sense to continue to use that code of ethics. It seemed to work. It had a life that outlived its designers. Yeah. And my hope would be that a sense of vitality would carry a similar kind of momentum. And yeah, I think I'll stop there.
Oh, let your momentum carry you forward.
So most every book that I've read with the church in mind, like from mainline congregations, they will talk about 8 principles of vitality, or what it means to be, a vital congregation. It lists. And so I think vitality means different things to different people. So I think, Bill, you're kind of like the code. There's several different aspects of that code, for the congregation. And I think all of our congregations probably might see vitality in different ways. And part of that is linked to our social, economic, or cultural situations as well. So that's going to be first of all, I think it's really hard to nail down, what does vitality mean? It means different things to different people.
Maybe for churches that have nailed down some sort of mission statement, it may be, are they actively doing that? Like what they've identified that they should be doing. That'd be one thing probably a lot of churches already have thought through and worked on.
I think one of the challenges that we face as a whole church is that we name things and we stop. We define things and we stop. And the ability to continue to innovate, or one of the people we've been working with in other conversations, we were talking about this idea that we're an anti-racist church, and he said, did you guys ever decide what it would actually look like if you became that? And then sort of order your world around saying, if that's what I say I am, or if this is what we think vitality means, and I agree, it could look a lot of different ways in a lot of different places in a lot of different contexts. But then we sort of order our world based on that. So I'm making decisions every day. If trust is important to me, the decisions that I make in my congregation or in my region, I'm always making decisions that are leading me closer to what I think that's going to look like. If this is, we talk all the time about the future story, but naming these things for me is important only in so much as we not only are moving and we're always making decisions based on those things. That's kind of how we get there, that we always hold it up and say, wait a minute, does that cohere with where we want to go and what we want to look like and what we want to be? And that movement never really stops, because what vitality looked like in the 80s is not what it has to look like now. What it looked like a year ago is not is not what it has to look like now. So I think that ability, and I'm using this language, and you'll probably get sick of me hearing it if you're paying attention to any of my communications, but the courage to imagine who we must be, and then giving ourselves the permission to change and moving through these things with freedom from fear. To me, those attributes of people and institutions are what make you vital. When you continue to have the courage and the imagination to be willing to think differently and then move forward and then wrestle, not that your fear is not there, but that you're not bound by it. So I think it's a constant move forward. And once we have that picture of what we're trying to get to, we order our world according to those things. We make decisions, we prioritize in ways that cohere with what we say vitality is, or any other attribute that we think is important in life. So that ability to be creative, I think, is something that we have to reclaim, because there's no 1980s corporate manual that's going to get us out of this. So we're going to have to come up with those things. And as church, we've named this also, that we have to be just spiritually grounded, because that's who we are. We're not here to run a good 501c3. It's great to feed people and do all those sorts of things, but we don't have to be Christian to do all that. So anyway, just my 2 cents.
There's a tension in there that I just want to kind of lift up. I appreciate there's a distinction between having and to me, for me, this is just my sense. It seems to me that there's a distinction between having a mission statement and a vision statement, which probably many of our churches have, and asking people, how are you doing against that? And what it makes me think about is, we have businesses and we have school districts, and they put out a report at the end of the year showing how they're living up to this mission and their vision. And what they don't do is they don't tell what I would describe as kind of the dark underside, the soft belly underside, where things aren't really going well, where we're really not measuring up, quote unquote. And then there's something else, which I'm hearing Terry articulate around, what's the image that we hold when we talk about vitality? And I'm not sure, for me, there's a big distinction there. I'm not sure that I can articulate what that distinction is, but it's more than simply writing a mission or a vision statement. For me, and I don't want to get caught in that trap personally. I'm not sure that will serve, but it'll certainly look good, and we can be able to say to our local churches and to our regional boards, look, we've got a purpose statement. But to me, that's like, we're going to be recreating something again. And so I appreciate, but I appreciate what you're saying, Terry. I'm just not sure how we differentiate what you're articulating about crafting an image, being creative and imaginative, some of what I heard Megan saying about adapting to change, and being willing to constantly ask ourselves, and what does this mean today for us today in this new situation? So just some thoughts.
No, that's good, because the church is not a static entity. It's constantly changing, adapting, moving. And I think this is all part of the conversation, just because we're here because we look around and we're like, well, we have congregations that aren't vital. So every congregation is going to be different, right? Where you're like, oh, what about this? This led me to think we need some help, or we need encouragement. We need to work together.
If we decide to invite someone from the Northern Lights collaboration or the new region, one of the questions we could ask them is, do you feel in this partnership you've witnessed, I mean, how do you define vitality maybe within this new partnership? How do your churches, how have they experienced vitality in collaboration with working together, this new partnership? It might be something to ask them. They might help us get some insight about what vitality is. I know in our planning team, Justin and Joyce and myself, I had asked Chris. Chris said he could put us in touch with somebody to come and speak with us at our next meeting, if that's what people would like. And I don't mean to be jumping off this or changing course, but I do think there could be some insight into vitality by inviting somebody from the outside to come in and talk about it.
And just a quick follow-up to that, Daryl, I did talk to Sandy Messick in the Northern Lights, and she said she'd be more than happy to be a part of a conversation. And I encourage her to think about maybe one or two other people in addition. So it's not only the regional minister, but also other people. And so I think that's certainly a possibility if we choose to do that.
I could just share something from a local church perspective. We always deal with that quote unquote 80-20 rule, which is probably 90-10 in reality now. And even though at a local level you can have vitality and creativity, you're still going to have that nucleus that's probably not going to be no more than 15 to 20 people that'll kind of be the change agents for the entire congregation. And so I think one of the things I know what I think about is when we talk about change, it's not going to come from the whole of the congregation. It's going to come from a smaller nucleus. And so to try to get, I guess, buy-in from the whole, what I've experienced is people will follow your lead if they trust you and if they can see results from changes you make. But I think sometimes you can get stuck trying to get the whole to necessarily agree to what you're trying to do. I think change happens with change agents, and that nucleus sometimes is a smaller group.
So what we're talking about is those results. What do we mean by they can see those results?
Well, from changes that you make. So if you cast vision, and everyone's not going to necessarily be as open and honest about whether or not they agree, but they'll, for many intents purposes, they'll show you by their participation of it. And I've just experienced that, you have to go with what you feel in your gut, with what you feel in your heart, with what you've prayed about, what you've had conversation about. And it's going to happen not with a large group. It's going to happen, for most intents purposes, with a smaller group. So I think you have to be okay with being a change agent, even though you might stick out like a sore thumb.
And I wonder if we don't live with some paradox there, that, you know, that the change agents, that 10 to 20% that we look to make things happen, or lead change, they're also the ones that are invested in whatever it is we're doing. And so we're trying to invest them in something new, but yet, you know, so they've got to be a really flexible group of people, willing to take on something new, even though they're the ones that really invested in getting the last new thing going. And we have to really take care of those folks, because without them, we're paddling upstream.
It seems like you just made me think, well, a lot of the vitality of congregations is built on, obviously, the individuals that make up the congregation. Let's not forget that point, right? That's the people who are involved, committed, giving. And that's why Kevin was like, well, if you have that core 20%, it might be all you need.
I think in reality, I think if we look at it from a local church perspective, that's the reality. It's, you know, I mean, there's always a hope and expectation for there to be more, but the reality is there's always a small group that's leading the way. And it has to be a group that's not leading in a way that is exclusive of everyone else that may not be as involved or engaged, but it's gaining their trust to trust your leadership. And I think that's where it starts. It starts with that level of trust. Do we feel like we have the trust of those around us who would entrust us with making necessary and creative change that is going to be vital for the health of our congregations, our region, our national church as a whole? So I think trust is where it is the bridge.
So in our planning meeting, you brought up the 80-20. We were talking about that in our planning meeting, because the question was kind of how do I identify how to strengthen the vitality of local congregations that I put together. But I said aloud to everyone, I was like, well, you're only going to get those 20% of people to probably respond. You know, the people that would actually, if you did some sort of survey or some sort of way to get people to respond on vitality, it would probably only be that small percent that would respond. It wouldn't be the whole congregation, most likely. Though I suppose you might get some people to tell you, some grouches to tell you what they think is wrong.
So I wonder if at this point, would it be helpful to think about how do we engage the local churches in this conversation and whatever the small group of questions we might want to ask? Because we could probably talk about there's a lot of theories that come to my mind that I could toss into the basket that would either flow with what's being said or go in a totally different direction from and I want to be careful personally about, we don't even have 7 or 8 months left. I'd really like us to figure out, what are we going to do here?
That's why,
Um,
well, yeah, we mentioned the pace of the work. We're not matching the intended goal with having to plan this fall. And I know the email went to some of us about, and you mentioned earlier, not just meeting once a month, but having some more activity. And that's why I had, well, what are the positives and negatives of our current arrangements? What we're, meeting monthly sort of thing. Are we not going to get done what we need to get done? And how should we adjust to meet our goal sort of thing? Like, should we just keep meeting monthly talking about this? Should we have some a group to go and work on some questions we would want to bring to the local congregations? Do we want to have other sessions, or it's just possibilities?
So Justin, in your in part B of number 3, how do I identify how to strengthen the vitality of the local church? I think that's a good question for us to ask the local congregations and to get feedback. It's Easter. I mean, we're coming up on Easter. What better time to talk about vitality and resurrection and newness than the season of Easter? But I do think that maybe the question is before us: how do we get this information from each of our congregations? If we would receive that information, one could kind of look at it across the board and probably find some commonalities that we all share, that could define maybe what vitality would look like in a partnership. But yeah, I mean, the first thing is, what's the process? The question before us is, what's the process for getting that information from each of our congregations?
Go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say, Daryl, could I reframe your question maybe a little bit? How would congregations like to participate in a process of describing vitality? If we're going to engage with congregations, what would they want to do? What would they need in order to be able to engage in a healthy conversation that would result in the kind of feedback that this group is looking for? Imagine that you've just got the feedback. It's really important. How do we get there? What did they need for us to do in order to help them provide the feedback that you're looking for?
Some really good questions, probably, to draw out their participation, interest. And again, we're talking about honest answers, right?
The dishonest ones don't help much.
I think that's another good question that we could ask some whoever joins us maybe in the next month or two from the other region that partnered together or merged, to see how their perception of how local congregations have benefited from that merger or partnership. Did they reach out to local congregations to get input? How did they do that? I go back to the fact that I feel like that the majority of our congregants don't really have a perception of what the region does unless they've sat on a search committee or other other reasons. But I don't think most people understand or even know there is a regional church. And right or wrong, I don't know. I'm still, having a hard time grasping that.
The other thing that Bill's question makes me think about is, so if you ask the information from local churches, how does that help you think beyond your specific region. Because there are 3 regions here having this conversation and trying to figure out in partnership, how do we respond, as opposed to just how does my region respond to my local congregation?
And I wonder if some of that can be addressed through the process that we choose, right? So one way would be one-dimensional. Let's send a survey out and ask members of this committee to shepherd X number of churches to make sure we get Y number of survey results or responses. Another would be more multidimensional, where we ask each of you as a steering committee member to facilitate conversation among 3 people from 3 churches, all 3 churches from each of the 3 regions. So a total of 9 churches, group of 27 or something like that. So that we're designing right into the process an engagement where people from other churches are talking directly with each other. And our job is listening and recording, capturing what they're saying, not trying to tell them, but listen, evoke.
Facilitating conversation.
What about, and I kind of agree along those lines. What if we, what if this group could somehow, and I'm not sure how to approach it, but what if we could get local congregations to establish, and unfortunately, I think we have a great time to do it is now, and that is establish like a church vitality team, and just have them begin talking about vitality within their own context. And then have a representative, whether it's a pastor or whether it's a lay person, to bring that information back to this committee so that they're beginning to talk about vitality as it relates to their context. And then we can bring it back and just kind of see how it fits in the whole of what we're talking about. So again, we've got people talking about church vitality, especially now, because churches are different than they are and than they have been because of, the pandemic. So I think it's a great time to begin the conversation, but I don't know if we're ready yet to ask them to talk about vitality from a regional perspective without bypassing, how they're feeling in their own church about vitality. So I think if we can get talking about that, then we can begin to go into some conversation about, a more general conversation with our region.
Just to be above board, I think the information that Chris, Bill, Ken sent, and maybe Steve was part of that too, about some ideas that you all had. Is this a place to talk about that?
Sure. I think it could be a good place to talk about it. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to right now.
Some thoughts that were sent via email and that involves conversations. Maybe Chris was alluding to that through the way we structure this.
The email about the regional ministers that met with Terry,
Sure.
And they sent to us the planning for our planning meeting the day before we got together.
Sure. Would it be okay, Ken, Steve, Bill, if I try to?
Go ahead.
So
Chris.
Following our last meeting where we talked about doing something, and I was pretty hesitant. I was more than pretty hesitant. That's an understatement. I was reluctant and pushed back on the idea of doing something because I was afraid that would distract us from really carving out what is this partnership really about. And yes, I value certainly the whole model of action and reflection, right? That I value that very much. I don't think we have time for that. So I was pushing back on it. And I sat with the question that Joyce asked, which was, is there a both and here? And I said, no. That was my first trigger. Chris, you got to shut up and listen to yourself as well as the other voices. So I went for a lot of walks and I listened and I listened and I listened and went, oh, there is a both and here. And one possible both and for me was, can we as a steering committee host a series of conversations with our local churches, asking them a set of very clear, concise questions, not a meandering around, but a really like, here are 3 questions. We're all going to ask the same questions of our groups, and we're going to come back with notes saying, here's what we heard in response to those 3 questions, so that we as a committee are working together in designing something and doing something. We're engaging our local churches in this partnership question. And so we're connecting right away into it. And the doing is we're beginning to have our churches talking directly with each other, building relationships. So it wouldn't be 3 churches in Kansas talking to each other or 9 churches in Kansas talking. That's probably already happening through your assemblies, clergy retreats, women's retreats, whatever. It's how do we cross these lines? So that's what I came up with. I put that out to my regional minister colleagues and Terry to say, what do you all think of this? Like, is this a harebrained idea, or does this have any legs underneath it? So we kind of meshed it out and played with it some, and you got an email that very next day or that day of that meeting. And it happened to be, I wasn't aware when you all were meeting to plan this. So I sent it to the 3 of you plus Joyce to say, here's what the regional ministers did. The last thing I want to add just real quickly is one of the things that we had promised the steering committee was that the regional ministers weren't going to try to steer this ship. This really needed to be the steering committee. And we are part of the steering committee. And we're regional ministers who work on this every day. So we're probably going to be thinking about this in ways that may be different. Not better by any means, but different. And so that's what struck me is, you know what, it's okay for the 4 of us to talk with Terry as if, like, we need that time and space. So we may do that again. I don't know. We might ask Joyce, would you coach us? I have no idea. But I just want to put that out there, that also sparked that dimension. So if anybody has a kind of an ouch to our doing this, please feel free to say so. Like, hey, wait a minute, that's not okay. We don't want you doing that, or I have mixed feelings about that, whatever. It's okay. But I just want to name that there's a dynamic here that I don't want to sweep under the rug and hope everybody will be okay with. And then 2 years later, we find out, boy, those regional ministers really screwed this thing up. They should have never met with each other.
I think we'd be pretty stupid if we didn't avail ourselves of the opportunity to deal with you all on something that you work on every single day. I mean, that'd be foolish. Now, we don't have to agree with your proposal, but if we don't listen to it, that'd be kind of goofy. So not wanting to be goofy. But here's a question I have. I'm confused and I need some help here. On one hand, we're talking to churches about vitality and what they need and how we can help with that. On the other hand, we're trying to talk about, okay, how do we act as regions or partners or a merged entity? There's still that nebulous piece over there on that side. So we're coming at this thing from kind of 2 directions all at the same time, which I don't mind trying something sophisticated like that, but I think we have to recognize what it is we're getting into. And I think it definitely can be useful to talk to congregations and to ask the same questions coming from our context and asking them about theirs. but with specific questions, so we have some way to put the answers together that make any sense at all. But doing that with the idea, does it help us answer our question about what we want to do about being 3 separate regions, or some kind of partnering regions, or work toward being 1 region? Because at the end of the day, that's one of the questions, right?
And engaging in designing a process of engaging the congregations is itself going to indicate to us, what does it mean for us to act like partners? And we'll trip and we'll fall sometimes. We'll have some victories to celebrate. We'll learn a lot from that. But we'll be moving closer toward that goal that Chris was talking about.
And that would be in a good direction, because when we met for planning, we were talking about what we do now is one person leads, me, like I lead the company from a different region every time. And then like I will meet with someone from Kansas who's going to lead it next time. That's what the current arrangement has been. And so you get people that haven't been involved with planning very closely, any of this, leading, and it makes the work go, it probably contributes to the work going slowly. So we were concerned with, if we're going too slow, what could we change to make sure we meet our goal, instead of having incomplete work at the end of this year, which it seems if we keep going this way in our current arrangement, that's what's going to happen. We won't finish in time. And I think the proposal we're talking about is a way to help with that work, but it would require buy-in, so that's part of the discussion.
I don't mind trying to move faster, but what I do mind is putting a artificial deadline out there that we say the world's going to stop turning if we don't get all our work done in a certain time frame, when we know that in fact our world will not stop turning. I want to do it right and the best we can, rather than as fast as we can. And I know y'all do too, but I just want to say that fast is not my goal.
No, it's not. It's just, we're experimenting doing this, right? Have we done this before? Like, just the way we've been doing that, is that the best way just because we've been doing it that way? I think I think we're learning as we're going. So, and I think we talked about that. The church is adjusting continually and is organic. So even I'm sure this group of people will be changing as we go about this as well.
And I don't want to try to speak for Sandy Messick or the Northern Lights folks, but I will just name that one of the key things that they have honed in on is they have focused their work and ministry around adaptive change, interestingly enough. I'm sorry, Joyce, I saw that you were going to talk. I should have shut up and let you go.
No, I think that was useful, Chris. And I just wanted to say thank you for elevating. I think there's lots of ways that when I'm kind of looking at your system and looking at your process, there are lots of interpretations I could make. And one of them, I think you were potentially elevating, and that is that it feels like there's 2 agendas here. One agenda is an original agenda from 4 regional ministers who said, we think there's something here. We want to explore it. We're not really sure. I don't remember you all saying there were major points of pain, like this is why we have to. It was more, we want to see what's possible. And part of the idea in forming this group was that this committee could take on the work. And so that's part of the stated agenda, is this committee could take on this work to figure out what's possible. But at the same time, there's this agenda that's happening with the 4 of you, and maybe with Terry, right? where you are continuing to do this work, trying to hand work to this committee, and I'm not sure the committee and you are on the same page all the time or running at the same pace. And so I feel a sense of loss when the four of you are on the one hand saying we don't want to drive it and you're stepping back, because I think part of what you hold is this idea of vision for it. And I think the rest of the group might, it feels like they might be struggling with that. But when you offered the idea in the email that you sent, it was sort of like now coming back to the group saying, well, we are thinking about this. Yes, we're trying to hold back, but we are thinking about it. And we want to offer our contribution and just to be open with that. So that was one interpretation was it feels like there's some competing agendas. And I think that there's some sense of loss when you do step back. I'm not saying you should step in and always lead, but when you don't offer that shared conversation that you're having, potentially it's not as helpful to the rest of the group. And I'm not knocking what the rest of the group is trying to do and what you're trying to wrestle with here, because I think there's something really important. So that also speaks to something that Justin was talking about. The model of shared leadership that you've been practicing has its pluses and it potentially has its minuses unless there's more clarity about what are we doing or where are we going. Because it means that the next person in line to try to lead the meeting, or the group that's trying to lead the meeting, is potentially starting all over again, right? You lack the sense of continuity. So I think when Justin was elevating that, that was something that he and Daryl might have been feeling, is that every time you change the person who's leading, you lose a little bit of continuity there. So I just wanted to elevate those two things. There's pluses and minuses about the direction you've been going. And I just want to say I appreciate your openness to stepping back in. Not to lead, but to contribute in the way that you did.
So I'm wondering if in the next planning agenda, when Justin and Joyce and a representative from Kansas who will step in line to facilitate, if the regional ministers it wouldn't be a good idea for the regional ministers to meet with the planning the agenda for next time, given this conversation. And I think Joyce stated that very, very well.
Maybe it's one of them, I don't know. But there's the voice, I think, is helpful and useful.
I mean, originally I've always felt that, we were called together by the regional ministers. And so I always felt it was kind of weird that there was pushback, like, we don't want to lead it, it's up to you. And I'm just like, well, you brought me together. Help me. I don't know what I'm doing. You called us together for a reason. I need you to help me understand what that is, sort of thing. And that's just some confusion I had felt for a while, unsure, like, what are we doing? But thank you for sharing, Chris. That was interesting because you were like, well, I pushed back on doing something, but then I thought about it. And because when you guys do like shut something down, it's like, oh, I need to pull back, because it does affect what else, we're thinking and doing. I mean, even if it doesn't seem very explicit, but there is a leadership, modeling there. But, and in what you're saying too, truth telling. So that's helpful for me as well. So thank you for sharing.
I would like to make a proposal in the interest of answering a question I think that was asked some time ago, and we've kind of just talked all the way around it. And that is developing a list of questions that we would want to ask local congregations that would somehow then help us in whatever it is we think we're doing. That question was asked, right? I'm not just imagining that. Okay. I don't think we're very good at doing that with the whole group here. I would like to propose that we have one person from each region serve on a sub-team, if you will, to put together I don't know, let's pick a number. Let's make it small. Let's say, I don't know, 3 to 5 questions, maybe 3 that we want to ask congregations. And the 3 people on this sub team then bring that back to the group so we can get some of that work done between now and next time. And since I proposed it, I would volunteer to be the person from Kansas. The other Kansas people say that's okay. Ruby, if you say you're an idiot and I'd just soon you not do that, I'm perfectly open to that.
Can I get a
Go for it.
motion? Can I get a motion? Yeah. Can I get a second?
I'm just proposing it, do with it what you want.
I love that idea, Kelly. I think that's wonderful. And I would encourage the group to go ahead and make it 3 or 5 and bring back whatever you come up with and let this group chew on it and help to distill it. But anybody from Nebraska? There's only 2 of you tonight. So anybody from Nebraska want to raise your hand and join Kelly?
Sure, Kelly, I'll be happy to do that.
Because I kind of sensed y'all weren't jumping at it.
I mean, I'll join you from Kansas City. Unless someone else wants to. I'm interested in the question, so I'm kind of the one who brought it up originally, so
Right.
Yes, you are.
It would be bad of me to hold back now.
And with that group, would you want to ask Joyce to join you in helping with coaching about that?
I was just going to offer if that's useful.
Okay. And would you like a regional minister to be a part of that?
Sure.
Yes.
I don't care. Yeah.
Don't say I don't care.
Well, we can do it without them or with you. If you all want to contribute, sure.
I would be willing to join that group if that's okay with the other regional ministers.
Look at that homework we're doing now.
I will send out an email if you don't mind, trying to select a time, date and time that we can talk, and be thinking about it in the meantime, please.
Good, thank you.
And then we can, and I don't know how many sessions it'll take to work this out, as many as it takes, I suppose. And then maybe we can get something done.
So we got 15 minutes, well, a little less. I just want to make sure, do we agree we want to invite someone from Northern Lights, their team or someone, to come to the next meeting? Okay, so I think I'll take that as yeses. That's what we want to do. We want to put that on the agenda for next meeting. So one of the questions was, well, what do we want to ask them? So we're prepared.
I think one of the things that we're going to want to ask them is, how did they engage their congregations in the process that led to their decisions?
I would like to ask them what it was that they imagined that they would gain from doing a partnership or doing a merger. What did they imagine they would gain, and have they in fact gained that? Or are they on the way to gaining it?
Or have they gained other unexpected benefits from the merger or partnership?
Yeah, unintended consequences.
Or, it'll be like, what has surprised you in a good way about the partnership? Yeah.
Right. That would be good.
Yeah, or a bad way.
Mhm.
Well,
we
that would be the flip side,
I mean,
It's like,
what has surprised you?
yeah. Well,
Right. And if maybe if they have any words of wisdom, things they would have done differently.
What were your I think it's a question of like, what were your expectations
Mhm.
and how is reality kind of
Right.
rubbed up against your expectations, sort of thing? Because
I'd
that
be ready.
involves surprise, positively, negatively, in both ways. Think about my wife talking about what she would expected of marriage, and then the reality. It's a marriage of two regions, I'm telling you.
I'd wonder if they would be willing to share with us, where did they see God show up? How did they see God show up in all of this? When did they recognize that the Spirit was working with them and they were moving in a direction that God intended with them?
I really like that. Thank you, Bill. Thank you. So that's it. Thank you for bringing it back to that core point.
Kelly, the first question that was asked, I didn't get a chance to capture, and rather than going back and listening to the recording, do you remember what that first question was? I think you were the one who asked it, Kelly. That's why I'm asking you.
I wrote them down if you need.
Thank God.
Thanks.
I think it was something about
because the answer was, I don't have a clue.
What was it? Something about what did you hope to gain by the partnership or something like that?
First one was, how did they engage their congregations in the process that led to their decision?
Thank you.
That was Ken.
Yeah.
That was Ken.
But let me think. What I know about what happened is the regional minister was in, the Washington, that area, went with the regional minister from Montana. They went to all the congregations together in Montana, visited them, and had that personal connection with all the congregations. So there was kind of this handing on the baton, personal relationship thing going on. Connection.
That was
with
after the
region.
merger.
That was after. That was
after. Yeah. So that's interesting. What happened before that?
Yeah. And you have a small number of congregations in Montana too. So
I think another specific question would be, prior to the merger, what was the level of connectivity between the congregations and regional? And did that number increase or decrease after the merger? In terms of percentage wise, what was the engagement? Did it increase the capacity, or did it stay the same, or did it decrease?
Kelly, can you, or not Kelly, I'm sorry, Kevin, can you say more? You said, what was the level of connectivity between the congregations and the regional church, and did it increase or decrease?
Prior to the merger. So if there was 50% participation after the merger, did that percentage increase or did it decrease?
Okay. In the last meeting, you also, this group generated a couple questions, some of which you've already picked up again, but the first one was, how has this merger impacted the local church and the regional church? More specifically.
There's a lot of questions in there, so we'll have to meet and decide which ones to hand on. I suppose it'd be a lot to go over with them, but it depends on what the agenda is going to be for next meeting. So
I'm gonna guess if they'll send questions ahead of time, Sandy and others who are going to attend can think of how to frame their answers in a way that might help you gather the kind of information you're asking in these questions.
Perfect.
Is that something that the planning group should be expecting to do, or is that another subgroup of two, maybe two people who are willing to craft that into a more manageable number of questions?
I'm willing to help anybody if you want help.
What was the question?
We just have so many questions to ask Northern Lights, and I was wondering if there's another small group of maybe just two people who could work on crafting
sorry.
these questions. I'm willing to be a part of that. If somebody would join me, and maybe the three of us with Joyce being the third, could we work on these questions together? Just in light of the times. Thanks, Ruby.
Chris, I'll help you.
Thanks, Ruby.
Okay, so just moving on, we don't have much time left, so I thought, reviewing our assignments. So we have a group that's going to meet to plan the agenda for the next meeting. And what date and time is the next meeting? So I want to go through these. We said it's what is it? Fourth?
I think the fourth
Tuesday?
fourth Tuesday of every month.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the 23rd of March. Does anyone have problems with the 23rd? Same time, same bat place?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. 23rd, 7 o'clock. The next facilitator then will be from the Kansas region. So we need someone to help from the Kansas region to volunteer. I'll be there to help as well, and so will Joyce. So I've already volunteered that part of me. So
I think Lori can do it.
Yeah. Yeah, she's not on tonight, but Kelly facilitated the first one. Both Kelly and Ruby have now volunteered to be a part of subcommittees. So if we need to have someone from Kansas to lead next session, then Lori will draft her.
and she'll have to watch a recording of this meeting essentially to understand, I think. I mean, I don't see any other way.
Well, if Ruby's willing to help lead the next meeting, I can help Chris and Joyce with the questions for the other region. Sorry.
I'm reluctant to say I will lead that meeting because I have a couple of complications that could arise that day, and I'm trying not to get locked in. I'm sorry. I'm not at home tonight, and I may well have issues next month.
Well, let's let Lori do it.
Yeah.
And
She'll be fine with it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure.
And if somebody's close to Lori, Ken or Steve, maybe you can spend some time. Do we want to have a regional minister be part of that planning group? I think I heard that earlier, was maybe one regional minister could be part of those planning groups. So I'm just asking.
We did ask for that earlier.
Right. Bill or Steve?
Would it be helpful to have the regional minister that is with the region that will be facilitating? I mean, that way if Lori is leading the meeting, that way you can be in communication with her and work together with that. And then when it comes to Nebraska, Chris and, Megan or Mike, whoever is next, and then.
So that would be Ken or Steve. Come on, hurry up. Time's running out.
Steve, did you say you would do it or? Okay.
What did Steve volunteer to help with?
Be the regional minister on the planning team with you guys for planning our
Wonderful.
next big gathering.
Thank you, Steve. And I would set a time and date for the agenda planning meeting, but Lori's not here, so I guess we'll have to send out an email, or the three of us can try and figure one out now and ask if it's good for her.
Well, she's moving, and so we need to give her a few days.
Yeah. Okay. That works for me. I just want to make sure we get our ducks in a row for our next meeting.
So who in fact is going to send out that email
The one that Lori-
specifically? The one for the planning meeting, the agenda planning meeting, is to secure the date. I heard but we never does those things.
That's right. We never does.
So another option is to let everyone go except the planning committee and see if we can come up with a couple of possibilities and then ask Lori if they would work.
Is that okay? Good. All right.
See y'all.
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
It was a hoot.
God bless you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, everybody. Good to see
Thank
you
you,
all.
everyone. Good to see you.
Joyce and planning group, I'll just disappear and don't worry. I'll close it in an hour or whenever I decide to get back.
Just stop, hit the stop recording then. And
oh, okay. Steve Martin just checked out though.